Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Sarah Jamansky, Extension Educator for Purdue Extension in Perry County, Indiana. Welcome to the very last of our Lunch and Learn webinar series. Today, our topic is safe handling and transportation of sheep and goats. We have two guest speakers today. They're my fellow educators, Matthias Engel and Mark Kepler. Matthias grew up around sheep and dairy goats. He was a 10-year 4-H member showing sheep and dairy goats throughout his 4-H career at the county and state level. He went on to Purdue University to receive his bachelor's degree in animal agribusiness. After Purdue, he went to work for a swine genetics company for a couple of years. From there, he went on to be a salesman for Townsend Sales out of Trafalgar, Indiana, selling sheep and goat equipment all over the country for 5.5 years. After stops in the commercial grain industry and at a farm equipment dealership, he is now the Ag and Natural Resources Extension Educator in Howard County. Matthias is married to his wonderful wife, Kim, and they have 2 children, Grayson and Gabrielle. Mark Kepler is the Purdue Extension Educator for Agricultural and Natural Resources and County Extension Director in Fulton County, Indiana for the past 24 years. He started Extension serving 11 years in Lake County as the A&R educator. He has a bachelor's degree from Purdue University in Animal Science and Agriculture Education. He has a master's degree from South Dakota State University in Animal Science with an emphasis in swine nutrition. He is a member of the Purdue Beef Team, Small Farms Team, and Leadership Development Group. He has presented papers at the National Small Farms Conference, National County Agents Association meetings, and other national activities. Mark is married to Roberta and has 3 sons. They live on a beef, goat, chicken, grain, and forage farm near Argos, Indiana, that has been in the family for 109 years, and also own property that has been in the family for 169 years. They also own land and cattle that is part of the family ranch in western South Dakota. So if you guys want to go ahead with your presentation.
All right, well, thank you for that introduction there, Sarah. I'll go ahead and share my screen here. All right, can everybody see my screen there? Okay. Can I get a thumbs up from Sarah or Mark? Make sure I got to share my screen.
Looks good.
Looks good. All right. Well, as Sarah said, my name is Matthias Engel. I'm the Ag and Natural Resources Educator up here in Howard County. Been here a little over a year now. So what we're going to talk to you today on is the best handling practices and safe transportation for sheep and goats. We're going to cover 3 main topics today. The movement of sheep and goats, that's where Mark's going to step in and take over. And then I'll step back in and talk a little bit over safe transportation of the sheep and goats. So to start off with, we're going to talk about a little bit of the types of handling equipment. There's always the great debate of whether you should make your own or go out and buy something. So we're going to start with some of the pros and cons of each, and we'll start with homemade equipment. With homemade equipment, it gives you control over the material that is used to make your equipment. It allows you to be creative and make equipment that is for a specific place or purpose. Maybe you've got a spot there where a nice feeder would be, and you have a great idea in your head, and you have the ability to make it. You know, being able to do some of that homemade equipment is really nice in that case. The cost can be perceived as being cheaper. And then with making some of your homemade equipment, you're only limited by your imagination. Some of the disadvantages of some of your homemade equipment is that you're limited to your abilities to create and build. You know, if you're like me, you know, you can get all these great ideas in your head, but you may not always be able to execute those ideas. So you may be thinking, hey, I can build this great tilt table over here, but how it works and how it actually is may not actually come to fruition. And with homemade equipment, a lot of times it's a trial and error process. You can build, then use and modify and or you build it and then you use it, and then you have the ability to modify it to make it better if it doesn't quite work the way you thought it would. You have to take time out of your busy schedule in order to build the equipment. It's just not going to magically show up one day. Yeah, you can put it on paper, but it's not just going to magically show up to be there the next day. You actually have to take the time to build it. And things may not work the way that you thought they would. Another thing to think about is the resale value. With homemade equipment, the resale market isn't always there. Just because you made it at home and it works great in your operation, that doesn't always translate to somebody else's operation. So in this presentation here, I've got about 3 separate resources for you. North Dakota State, Premier One Supplies, and Midwest Plan Service. We'll dive into North Dakota State here just a little bit. Some of these plans that they have on their books actually date back to the 1930s. So they're out there, but they may not always be the best, but you still have the ability to build stuff on your own. On the screen here, you can see I just pulled out a 3-way cut gate for sheep and a fence line feeder. I think the 3-way cut gate for sheep that plan goes back to like 1955 or something like that. And the fence line feeder, I think, is 1979. So you can go on there, you can get the plans, and you can find out what you need in order to build them. Premier One Supplies, it's more for feeders than anything else, but there still is the ability to do some handling equipment in there as well. With your commercial made or your commercial made equipment, you have a more uniform product that you know what you're getting. You have somebody that you can talk to help solve your problems. You don't have to build anything. It's more of a plug and play type situation. You go, you buy it, and you use it. It's easier to use and take down when not in use. With some of that homemade equipment, it may not be or you may not be able to transport it as well as you can some of this commercially made stuff. You also have potential resale value. I sold quite a few tip tables in my time that were used. And what we figured on those is 2/3 of what the new price would be. It didn't matter whether it was 20 years old or 5 years old. It was about 2/3 of the 2/3 of the retail price. Along with it, you've got some warranties that go into place. Maybe it doesn't quite work the way that you thought it would, or there was just a manufacturing error. You've got somebody to go back to and say, hey, this didn't quite work the way I thought it was going to, or as where with the homemade, you only have yourself to blame. Some of the cons: modifications may still need to be made to some of this commercially made equipment. Yes, it is pretty standard throughout the industry, but there are always certain instances where it may not work the best in your operation. It can be perceived as more expensive than building your own. You sometimes have the transport or shipping to the farm, and it may be more difficult. A lot of the pieces that I sold over the years actually had to go over a freight truck. And so some of those freight rates can get quite expensive compared to the actual cost of the unit that you're trying to purchase. Then when you get those to where they're supposed to be, you may have to assemble them in order to use them. So here are some resources for some commercial equipment. This is by no means an extensive list. These are just some of the ones that I know I've worked with in the past. We'll dive a little bit into our handling equipment and the different types that are available out there. So I'm sure we've all seen the handling systems that come in the pretty magazines, and they look really, really nice. These handling systems make it easier to work and handle your livestock. Some people use these to trim hooves, or maybe you're doing some Fromancia scores or to worm your animals. Maybe you're wanting to sort them. Maybe you got two rams that are two pens that you want to sort ewes into, or just sorting some of your goats that way. Maybe you've got some foot rot problems and you want to be able to control that. So you set your handling system up to put a foot bath under it. Maybe you're wanting to know how much your lambs weigh or your kids weigh to go to market. Now, are they 100 pounds or are they 120 pounds? Or maybe you're selling off the farm and you want to be able to charge the customer exactly what they weigh. Or maybe you're wanting to load them out for transport. I've even seen some instances where shearing sheep where they use these to shear the sheep. The main thing is when you're making a system, make it suit you. You can mix and match pieces of different types in order to get what you need and what works best for you. One thing to remember is that what works best on your farm may not work the best at another farm. I'm going to highlight just about two or three pieces here that are really essential, in my opinion, that for creating a useful system. The first one here is a tub or a circle. What this does is it's kind of acts like a funnel. It takes your sheep from a mass group or your goats from a mass group and kind of funnels them down to the alleyway, kind of gets them in line one by one. And it does that by the gates just kind of creating a smaller and smaller area for them to turn around in till they get to a place where they can line up. The next one is a tilt table or a turntable. These turntables or tilt tables make it easier to trim hooves. It also can be easier to work on a particular goat or a sheep. And these also adjust to individual animals. No two animals are exactly the same. And so in these tilt tables, there's built in a lot of adjustments to where you can safely handle your animals. A third option here is a work platform. Uh, these these actually raise the animals up, or they actually walk up a ramp, and then your hooves are up there to where they can be easily worked on. Some of these can be used for worming, your ear tagging, giving shots, or just general. It goes back to our Fermanchas and everything like that. That list we gave you earlier. One of the disadvantages of these work platforms is all the animals usually have to jump down to get out of them. So there is a little bit of an increase of risk for injury in this type of system. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mark here, and he's going to take us through the movement of sheep and goats.
Thank you, Matthias. And Matthias is going to be my page turner during this presentation, so I'll tell him to go on from here to there. I want to start out first by mentioning some of the things that Matthias said about handling equipment. I raise beef cattle and I raise also goats. And so far I've been injured more by my goats than my beef cattle, which is hard to understand. But those 1,500-pound beef cattle or 1,400-pound cows that I have not done as much damage to me as just catching a goat with my arm and then ripping one of the tendons in my arm, and essentially it's caused a tremendous amount of surgery, and I don't think that arm will ever be right. So handling equipment is really important and will benefit you in the long run. So let's take a look at our first slide, Matthias. We're going to be talking about some of the requirements for transporting sheep and goats. And so we're going to look at what's going through their heads. And one of the things we remember right off the bat is that we are talking about animals that are prey species. They are used to being eaten by something else. And because of that, that's the way they react to the world. And so they can be very flighty when you move up to them. And we're going to talk about that flighty and how it might be handled. So one of the most important things in handling these animals is to look at it on a quiet basis and be very calm and quiet when we deal with them. And we don't use dogs Dogs are specialized. Some people can use specialized dogs and do a good job of it, but having any dog around just causes my animals on my farm, who are not used to dogs, to be very, very flighty. They all line up and stamp their foot when they see a dog show up. The livestock transportation trailer or the truck is a preferred method to do it. I've seen people pull up to my farm, put goats in a back of a pickup truck where they had a livestock panel in there, and drive down the road with these animals, and that air blowing into those animals, and they essentially later on had pneumonia. So that's not the way to do it. Those transportation trailers will cut down on the amount of airflow that's going on there and allow that airflow to happen. We need to transport them so they're not overcrowded. Any animal will increase their levels of hormones in their body to correspond with that scare that's going through. And so overcrowding is a scare to them in that process. And the last thing I've got down here is there's different classes of livestock. And I think the main thing to think about is trying to transport them with animals that they're used to being with. So if the mother's there and the young, all the mature males together, these are the animals they've been around. When we shove them together and they're not used to being with somebody else, it can be a very, very difficult situation for them. So in the next slide, we're going to talk about something that gets to be rather confusing, but I think this is something that's really good information for people. So we'll start out, excuse me, we'll start out first with that circle around that animal. And that circle is called the flight zone. And that means as I walk up towards the animal, there will come a point where it'll decide to move. And the flight zone is all over the place. If that young goat I've got at home that we raised on a bottle right now, if I walk up to him and get into his flight zone, he'll be walking to me. And so there is no flight zone for that animal. But you know, if I look kind of scary, if I come at him running, there would be a flight zone. So how I handle that animal will change my flight zone. So lots of times there are other animals on my place, some goats, that will flight zone maybe 10 or 15 foot away. So with you get in 10 or 15 foot, they're going to move away from you because they don't like to be around animal or humans that much. And I always like to tell the story about this cow that was on my dad's dairy farm. She had a flight zone of about a quarter mile. If somebody else other than my dad stepped on the farm, she was gone. And that was the truth. She'd take a fence and that was it. She'd go. And so that cow was very, very flighty. The second thing on this slide, it kind of gives an area behind the animal that's shaded a little bit. So animals with their eyesight can see all the way around except for that little bit of shaded area in the back of it. And so that's the blind spot back there. If you walk into the blind spot, they can't see you. But when you walk out of that, then all of a sudden they will just get a glimpse of something back there. But by the nature of the eyes, they have what they call monocular vision. And that monocular vision means they just see something, but they really can't focus on it very well. And that will scare them. So coming in from the animals, moving in from that dark triangle, that area there is the area we want to move the animal from. And then the other thing is that line going into the shoulder of the animal. We call that the point of balance. And on the point of balance is as I'm walking at that animal, if I get ahead of that line, that animal will turn and go backwards. If I'm behind that line towards the rear of the animal, I will force that animal to walk ahead. So playing with a flight zone is something that we can see happen. We've got a video a little bit later on. I'll show you the flight zone. I'll show you how that works on a group of sheep as we go along. So this is a really important little picture. It's kind of busy, but it explains a lot about what's going on with these animals and how they are looking at the world that we're living in. So next slide, please. And so as we look into that, we have some general principles. Give the animal space. Watch that flight zone. Back up, come into it, keep calm, keep slow, slow down. Don't do anything that would cause them any issues. And approach them slowly at that slight angle behind that shoulder so we get them to move as we want them to. And I can talk by that time with gentle talk. And one of the things that's the most fearful thing to an animal is a human voice. And if they're not used to human voices, it's a scary thing for them. And when you raise your voice and really get loud, then it really gets scary for them and things start to mix up and then they have issues with humans. So utilizing your voice in the appropriate way will make a big difference when moving these animals. And when we get it all taken care of, we try to contain these animals all the time, and we try to show you how to get them to move in the desired direction that we want to go to. So this next slide shows you a video. And in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to try to catch one animal. Notice the flight zone on this is about 4 or 5 feet away. And then when we get 2 people involved in this video, we sped it up. We can see that it's easier to catch an animal. Notice how he does catch his sheep. When he gets to it, he'll just grab it underneath them there, and that animal is caught, and that's all there's going to do. Um, this video will show us whether sheep can fly or not. And in this, we're crowding them. They get all sorts of nervous. That animal there will try to come over the top and fly all over you. And we know that sheep can, in fact, fly on that video that's there. And so what we're really telling you is when you pressure animals, they will do all sorts of things you may not want them to do. You have to know how to handle those animals. That large pen that we're in there is a lousy way to go catch an animal and not something I want to do. So what we would have done was narrowed that pen down to begin with and had a better chance of getting him when that sheep flying over the top like we're talking about. If that was a bigger sheep, more weight, somebody could get hurt or injured in that process. And so it just shows you probably how not to do things that we're looking at as we get into that. So the next slide that we're going to look at is, all right, this guy's walking through this gate and he's going out to the sheep farm at Purdue University. We've sped this one up. First thing I want you to notice is see how people notice him, not people, sheep notice him that are out there. We've got sheep starting to stand up now. They're starting to move. They're starting to see him. His goal is to put those sheep right back through that gate that he came through to begin with. And so now he's over there, he's circling around him. This sheep over here has found him. He's got his eye on him. Now you'll see that sheep will turn here because he's got out of his vision. He was in the blind spot and now he's seeing where he's at. Now everybody's up thinking, uh-oh, something's happening. What's going on here? And they're starting to watch him as he comes around. I call this my synchronized swimming video because that's what's going to happen in this process. They're going to start moving all in unison. And as they move, they're looking out their left eyes and seeing him in back behind them. And he's going off to the right. At some point, sheep left out in the back will come in because they want to be with the rest of the herd. So you didn't have to go back and get those sheep back in that area. But as he moves them, he's behind them. And that behind him is back where they have their circle is at. And so as he encroaches into their circle, they start movement and he's moving back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, which is an excellent way to move these different animals as we go into this process that goes in there. Finally, in their synchronized swimming, which is, I think, an Olympic sport that I've watched before, they start moving up, and pretty soon one of them will find that gate. And once one of those animals find that gate, the rest of the animals will continue through it. One man getting that whole flock of animals to come up through that gate by moving back and forth and knowing how to handle those animals the best is exactly how he's been able to do that. And there they go, all through the gate, right to where we wanted them to be to begin with. Next slide. So this is kind of the handling of animals, and it's best to keep things calm in the process. Calm animals are more likely to a safe point. When that AI was back there behind him, he was actually fairly calm. They were a little bit flighty in that process, but they're a little scared of him. They didn't want to they may have gotten shots before or who knows what, but they were scared of those. And so once we get to animals that are very agitated, like had those ones that were closing in on a pen, they will spook, they will break, they will fly right over the top of you, and you just got to watch out how you use them. Next slide. So on the next slide, what we're looking at here is just a picture. And this picture talks about how animals view the world. I already mentioned this. They have their eyes, they have very poor depth perception. They can't see very far. They don't know how far things are off. And out the side of the eyes, they have this monocular vision. And when you get right in front of them, they have a binocular vision. That means they can see a little bit better right in front of them. But at the same time, animals don't see down very well and they don't see up very well. And that's why, as a deer hunter, they're always up in the trees somewhere because, as an animal, if a deer wants to stop and see you, he will stop and put his head up to see you up there. And otherwise, they have very limited vision up and down, and they have very good vision around, but I say good, they have a lot of vision around, but it's not very good. This is a scary situation we see here. This is a dark area going into a dark building. They do not like dark. We do not like dark. If we went into that building, we'd be a little scared. These animals are even more scared. So they're sensitive to these light movements and darkness. They're sensitive to shadows. I've seen videos before where cattle, just because of shadows, will walk in the sunlight, afraid of those shadows. We have things when we deal with animals, sometimes painted lines on the roads. And we deal with escaped animals. That's enough to scare them because they want to know what's going on. And if you watch that animal, what he'll do is stop, look at it, put his head down, sniff it, and then go on from there. So even trash in the way will stop our animals from moving like we want them to move. Now, before we get to the next slide is something that is utilizing beef cattle. And what we're trying to do is get these beef cattle into a dark area. So go ahead and show that, Matthias. And we'll take a look at seeing how the animals react. So these are beef. I'm on the right. Our beef specialist, Purdue University, is on the left. And we're just going to push those animals calm, nothing excited about them, into that dark area. And they do not want to go. That dark area could be a trailer that you're trying to put them onto that they can't really see in there because it's too dark. And what I try to tell people is you need to light that. If we would just take a light bulb and turn on the light bulb, that area would be lit. If it was a livestock trailer and we had a light bulb and we could just turn on the light bulb without livestock trailer, they would go into there. So finally what we do here is we add another gate onto the left side, and by utilizing that new gate on the left side, we can push them. They don't want to go, but now what we're doing is pushing them into that area and forcing them to go into there against their wishes. And again, they're just so absolute scared that there might be something in there just going to eat them or prey upon them. And that's why it takes hands on the hip, push movement to get them involved into going into that area. And eventually, out of enough pressure, that's what they'll end up doing is those animals will go into that area. So lots of times on our farms, what we're really doing is causing situations that they are not feeling comfortable with. And we need to do the best job that we can do to get them to be comfortable doing these types of things. You need to really think about how an animal thinks, how he sees the world, and what are some of the things out there that stops them from doing what we want to do with them. So movement of animals is an important part of dealing with livestock, and knowing how animals react to humans and the things around them is a very important thing for us to think about. Matthias, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thanks, Mark. Now we're going to change gears just a little bit here, and we're going to talk a little bit about sheep and goat transport. So, when thinking about sheep and goat transport, transport vehicles need to have adequate ventilation. You know, we've all seen those trailers that have the inserts going down the road, and in the summertime, we take those inserts out to get a little more uh, airflow going through those trailers. You know, when loading into the back of a truck, you or excuse me, the front of the vehicles must always provide protection from the wind as well. Like Mark said earlier, he's seen them where they just put a cattle panel in the back of a truck and they go down the road and they have the wind and then they essentially get pneumonia. What we're trying to do is we're trying to keep the animal as healthy as possible, and by not having a direct effect with the wind is one of the ways we can do that. With when handling it or hauling animals when it's cold outside, we need to really think about wind chill. So this chart here shows the actual air temperature on the top and the wind speed, or the speed that you would be driving, on the left-hand side. So we can just say it's 20 degrees outside and you're going 35 miles an hour down the road. And 20 degrees, 35 miles an hour down the road, that animal feels like it's negative 20 degrees out. Now, the amount of hair or wool on the animal can help it withstand the cold. But just because the animal has hair on it doesn't necessarily mean that it will be able to withstand the cold. So tips for cold weather transport. Like I said earlier, wind chill can kill the livestock. Don't transport during frigid days unless absolutely necessary. Plug those holes, use those trailer inserts or those ventilation inserts in your trailers. And another thing that you could do is put straw on the bottom of the trailer or the truck. That'll help keep those animals warm as they're being transported from place to place. Heat also has the ability to kill or hurt the animal as well. The graph here is on the top is the relative humidity, and on the left-hand side is the temperature. Temps over 100 degrees are always danger. Just because it's danger doesn't necessarily mean that something's going to happen, but it's more likely to happen. Temps above 100 degrees Fahrenheit and 25 degrees relative humidity are always emergency. With emergency, like we said earlier, you only want to do it if you have to do it. Don't plan on doing it at that point in time. If you are going to do it, when under the alert, you need to load about 10% less than you had originally planned. You move into that danger zone, you want to start at about 20% less. And if you get into the emergency, you really should postpone shipments until the weather moderates. So tips for hot weather. You want to increase your ventilation, get a lot of air moving through there. Kind of goes back to that wind chill thing. If we can kind of cool it down just enough that it makes it bearable for those animals, then we have a fighting chance they have a fighting chance of not dying as they're moving from place to place. Open those nose vents for ventilation. Load and unload properly. Heat will build up rapidly inside of a vehicle which is standing still. I'm sure we've all been in a barn with no airflow or anything like that, and we get in there and we're moving, and things it seems to get a little hotter a little quicker. There's nothing to actually take that heat that you're making and push it away from yourself. When loading a trailer, the hottest compartment on a semi-trailer is always at the bottom deck, and it's always right behind the cab. That is where the worst ventilation on that particular trailer is. And when you're loading animals, make sure the animals are fed and watered well before leaving, and be sure that they have water available once they are unloaded, and quickly. So here is a little bit of a little chart here to kind of go into the space requirement needed for your livestock. So this one actually breaks it down a little bit more between the wooled animals, so your sheep with the wool, or your goats, and also the shorn animals. As we know, shorn animals tend to be just a little bit less because they don't have the wool on them. So they typically require just a little bit less square footage. So above 66 pounds, they're going to require about 3 square feet of trailer space footage. If they're shorn, they're down to about 2.8 square feet. So not a lot of difference in above 66 pounds, but just enough that you might be able to get one or two more on the trailer. And make sure that you, when loading and unloading these animals, you have suitable ramps. So here's another way to look at it here. This chart is based off of a 92-inch wide trailer. So a 7 foot 8 inches. So I've got an example down here at the bottom. So you've got a 20-foot long floor length of a trailer that is 92 inches wide. And your animals typically are about 100 pounds. So on our chart, we see that each animal takes about 2.7 square feet and 2.7 sheet per foot of floor times the 20 foot. And on that trailer, you can safely get 54 animals that are 100 pounds. So this video here, I actually went out and took this video at my parents' place here. And this is a quick stop from about an eighth mile driveway. And the max speed I got on this was about 18 miles an hour. So as you notice, the goats are just kind of hanging out, and my camera work wasn't exactly the best there. But if you notice, did you see the goats actually jump when I came to a quick stop? They got off balance, and they just weren't able to withstand their foot or hold their footing there on a quick stop. Now, I did the same goats and did a slow stop. Same driveway, same everything, same potholes in the driveway. So that's why the camera is actually bouncing around a little bit here. But as we go along here, you'll notice the goats are just a little more calm. And once this video stops, they return to normal a lot quicker than what they did. They weren't as scared when coming to a slow stop. So that's why you want to be able to control your vehicle or your trailer as you're driving down the road along with stops. Basically, don't make sudden stops, otherwise it increases the likelihood of hurting the animals, especially when the trailer is not loaded to full capacity. So with that, does anybody have any questions?
If anyone has any questions, you can post them to the chat box or post them to the Q&A. And yes, the slides will be available. I posted the link. I'll post it again.
So Matthias, have you ever used one of those tilting platforms that you showed there?
Yes, I have.
What do you think of them?
I like them. It saves my back quite a bit. For dairy goats, they don't work quite as well, but with sheep and boar goats and everything like that, they're a time saver. Not necessarily a time saver in a lot of instances, but they save manual labor in a lot of places.
Well,
I would highly recommend them.
when a sheep is laid over, it's pretty well, that's the end of it for them.
Mhm.
Do goats, I've never laid a goat over before. How do they handle that?
It's a little different. Those goats don't necessarily like being on their side. The kind that I sold actually turned them all the way upside down, and actually you could squeeze them in a little bit tighter, and so it just gave them kind of like a blanket all the way around them almost.
So do you remember you being in the sales business from a long time ago, how much those things would run?
Last time I priced one, the one that I sold was around $1,500.
Okay.
But when you consider a doctor bill or something like that
Yeah, I'd
from
like
a
to tell
bad
you what my
back,
surgery cost.
yeah, exactly. It's pretty cheap insurance. And like I said, if you ever get out of the business and you're looking to sell those things, I had people coming and telling me, asking for used equipment all the time when I was selling, and we could generally get 2/3 of the new price out of it easily, easily.
Okay, we do have a question. What type of
Okay.
bedding do you recommend for transportation?
Um, Depends on your vehicle and your capabilities in there. But I've seen sawdust or shavings used in a lot of instances for easy clean out. Or like we went back to, if it's colder outside, we want to think about some of those straw or some of the using straw in some instances like that. That way it keeps the animals warmer.
We have another question. When traveling a long distance, what is recommended for stops? Every how many hours or how many miles?
If I remember right, it's about every 8 hours you should stop and let them out and do the water and at least water them. But I think that's it, but I will have to double check that. So if you want to get me their information, I can go ahead, or if they want to put their information in the chat box, I would be more than happy to double check that information.
And the follow up question is what is best to water them with on the road for long distance hauls for dairy goats? Cold water or warmer water?
Well, I'll have to look into that as well.
I would say home water. That's, if you could have some home water, that is the most difficult thing at bringing an animal to a 4-H fair is switching the water supply. And so I think water is fine. And if you're going to do that, and you can bring some water with you, that's better because they're not used to some chlorinated town water from someplace. And so home water is be the answer for me.
I like that answer, Mark. Home water is definitely the best, but sometimes when traveling those long distance, like I think the question asked, it's more. I would probably like cooler water personally, just so the animals have a chance to cool out if they're a little hot. But that's just personal.
Right. I would think it would be cool but not cold, is what you want.
Right. Yeah.
Like room temperature is fine.
Hmm. But definitely not warm, like hot, hot. If it's been sitting out in the sun for a while, probably not.
Do we have any other questions? I would appreciate it. If everyone would fill out the evaluation for today's program. I posted that link in the chat box. I also posted the link to the copies of today's slides. I'd like to thank everyone who's joined us for our sessions, and we will plan on having some more in the future, probably not weekly, but we may work on some monthly set webinars that we could offer on sheep and goats. And so if you could give us your input of what you'd like to hear about in the future, please do so. This recording will be posted to YouTube tomorrow, so take a look at my YouTube channel tomorrow, or I'll have a link on my Facebook page tomorrow to this recording. So everybody have a wonderful afternoon, and take good care of your sheep and goats. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Matthias, for today's presentation.
All right. Thanks for having us.